The scary thing from all of this research that we did is that from all the organizations that we interviewed, less than 11% said that vulnerability is viewed as a leadership strength and not a weakness inside their company. Almost a third of the 14,000 employees that we interviewed said they don't even know how vulnerability is perceived in their company, which means if you don't know, you're not going to be vulnerable. Only 16% of employees said that leaders display these qualities of vulnerable leadership often or always when appropriate. So think about what that means. 84% of employees around the world work for leaders who don't show willingness to be vulnerable, who don't admit to mistakes or failures, who don't inquire about the well-being of the people who work for them. That doesn't sound like a very good place to work, does it? So we still have a long way to go. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's two pieces here, right? Vulnerability and leadership. And as you look at this quadrant, you can ask yourself, where do you think you fit? So first, we have the beginner or the novice. This is somebody who is perhaps not yet in a leadership role, who's trying to decide what path should they take? Where should they go? So as I mentioned, if you only focus on leadership, and that's being good at your job, delivering results, then people are going to view you as a robot. If you're only vulnerable and you're only focusing on connecting with your people, then your employees are going to think you're incompetent. So the ideal place where you want to be is the vulnerable leader. You want your people to be able to know that you're good at what you do, and you want people to be able to connect with you. Now, this doesn't mean that you can never talk about mistakes or failures or challenges, because there's a lot of situations, let's say you get put into a vice president role for the first time, or a director role, or a leadership role for the first time. Does this mean that if you don't know how to do something, you can never be vulnerable? No. What it means is that even if you get put into a new role, it's okay to say that you've never done something or that you don't know how to do something, but follow that up with demonstrating how you're going to figure it out. One of the examples that I gave yesterday in my talk is, let's say you just got promoted to a leadership role for the first time, or maybe a senior leadership role for the first time. Usually one of the big mistakes that I see from a lot of the companies, and I've worked with thousands of them over the years, one of the big mistakes that I always see is that when you get put into an executive or a leadership role, you are supposed to address your workforce, right? It's your first time, you're in this new role, and they always ask the executive, say something to your people, introduce yourself, say hi. And one of the things that I always see these leaders do is they go in front of their companies and they say, I'm so excited to be the new director or vice president or leader at this company. This is a new role for me. I know that I've never done this before, but I'm really, really excited to be here, and I know that we're going to be doing some amazing work together. Thank you for having me. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound like a bad message, but it also doesn't, in the eyes of your employees, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't instill confidence. It doesn't make them think that you are going to be able to lead effectively. And in fact, a lot of the employees might be saying, I feel like I could do that job better than you can. So let's say, again, that same scenario. You're a new executive, a new vice president or director or a leader. Instead of just saying, I've never done this before, I'm new here, you go in front of your employees and say, I know I've never done this before. I know I'm a new leader, and I'm very, very excited to be leading your team. To make sure that I'm the best leader that you've had, I'm going to get executive mentorship from one of the other leaders who's been at this company for a long time. I'm also going to be working with an executive coach. Here are 3 leadership books that I'm reading, and I encourage you to read them as well so that you can follow along with what I'm doing. And my door is always going to be open to you for any feedback that you want to give me so that I can become better at what I'm doing so that I can better serve you. That's a very different message. It still has the vulnerability, but now what I'm doing is I'm demonstrating what actions I'm taking to get better at my job. So even if you don't know how to do something, or you made a mistake, always ask yourself, what can I demonstrate that I'm doing to get better, to learn, to grow? That's what especially inside of an organizational setting where people look to you for leadership, for guidance. They want to know, what are you doing to get better? What are you doing to close that gap? So that, again, is the big difference between vulnerability versus just leading with vulnerability. And so I talked about earlier this relationship between trust. And the reason why you want to lead with vulnerability is because it does what I call leveling the playing field. So inside of a lot of organizations just like yours, a lot of employees who work with and for you, they're already vulnerable to you. They're already dependent on you because you are their leader. And so you can make them work on projects they don't want to work on. You could make their life hell at work if you wanted to. Right? You have power and control over the people who work for you because you are their leader. So they are dependent on you, and they are vulnerable to you. And this is something that everybody knows. Right? This is the relationship. Everybody knows that as an employee, you're vulnerable to your leader, you're dependent on your leader. They could do all sorts of things to you to make your life unpleasant at work if they wanted to. Now, that is a very explicit relationship. Everybody knows that. But the difference is that you as leaders are also vulnerable and dependent on your people. But we just don't talk about that. Because think about what happens. If your employees don't do a good job, the company doesn't make as much money or the team is struggling, what happens? It comes back to you, right? You as the leader. So you are also dependent on your people, which means that you are also vulnerable to your people. The difference is in that first relationship, we talk about it and everybody knows it. But in the second scenario, leaders don't talk about it. We don't mention it inside of our companies, right? Only 30% of leaders practice that often or always when appropriate. So when you lead with vulnerability for your people, what it does is it levels the playing field. It puts you at equal footing with your employees. And when you are equal with them by leading with vulnerability, that's when you create trust. That's when you create collaboration. That's when you drive innovation. That's when your employees are going to come to you with their best ideas. That's where employees are going to come to you with any challenges that they're faced with. That's when employees will share ideas for opportunities with you. But if you don't level the playing field and you don't get on that equal level with them, that's not going to happen. They're not going to trust you. They're going to be scared to come with you with a mistake. They're going to be uncomfortable sharing ideas with you because they see you way up here and they are down here. So leading with vulnerability helps level the playing field, and that's why we start to see a lot of that business value and impact.